Welcome everybody to another Q&A session for the Coaching and Flourish podcast. I am your host, John Andrew Williams, and we're here with Britt Fulmer. Britt, how are you? How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Doing really well. Yeah, I got a bike ride in this weekend, so I feel like I'm getting back to my, I don't know, exercised self.
Yes. I'm excited for the warm weather too. We took our puppy to Valley Forge, which is like a national park. No, I don't know if it's national, but it's a park near us, and he loved it. And we got a hike in, so that was nice.
It's good stuff. It's good stuff. Cool. Let's jump in.
Yeah. So I was thinking a lot about what we could talk about today. And one of the things that's been coming up a lot in classes recently, and also with some clients of mine too, is this idea of problems and how to solve problems more effectively, what it means to truly define a problem, and even like how our perceptions sometimes impact our ability to solve problems. And, you know, when I teach the coach the client, not the problem class, I always get a lot of questions, but the most common one I get is, how am I helping my client solve a problem if I'm not focused on the problem? And so I'm curious, like, what would you say to that?
Yeah, this gets at the heart of coaching because this really is what coaching is about, or the premise of coaching from the client standpoint. From the coach's standpoint, the premise is listening empathetically and actively enough, and is curiosity enough. And the corollary to that is that if you do that, then you're also bringing in an empowerment basis of coaching rather than a knowledge basis. So the difference is, an empowerment basis looks at building up a client's skill set and knowledge of self and mindfulness and character strengths, things like that. Like, that's an empowerment basis. A knowledge basis looks at giving ideas, insights, things like that, things that are also useful, but looking at it from the standpoint of what's on the outside, like what are the, if we're looking at hope theory, what are the pathways, what are the things that you need in the pathway in order to solve this problem? Both are useful. I'm not saying that looking at the problem or trying to problem solve is not useful. It's just, when you're looking at a problem, when you're coaching someone that's from an empowerment basis, but you're looking at the problem and you start to try to problem solve or offer advice or your own expertise or ideas about things, from a coaching standpoint, you start breaking down the empowerment basis. The meta message is, if a coach does that, offers advice, is you don't have the internal resources, or you don't have the resources yourself to solve it. And that breaks the coaching process down. So it's a little bit of it's a leap of faith often for the coach and the client to say, you know what, we're going to not try to solve this problem right away or at all, but we're going to try to get curious about it and see what insights come up about myself, what strengths I have, what's that inner world like, how am I even grappling with this thing. Those insights are so valuable, like wildly valuable. And the premise of coaching is that those insights that you gain are going to be more valuable than if the problem were solved. It's not comfortable. It's not easy. And when I think of it and apply it to my own life and the clients' lives I've seen, it's hard. This is not to minimize pain or to minimize the problem or to minimize the things. It's not that at all. It's being with the problem, but not having the same habitual reaction to it. Instead of judging yourself, instead of trying to judge the situation and feeling bad and going into that tailspin, which is natural. I'm there too. Instead of doing that, it's what a coach can do is help a client be with a challenging situation without this habitual ideas or habitual emotional mental swirl. Instead, just calm it all down, be with, get curious, and usually something comes out of it. Some insight comes out of it. And that insight will start to unravel the problem in an unexpected way.
Mm.
And I've seen it again and again, over and over. Yeah, it's just trusting the process. And once that happens enough, then it becomes an additional capacity. Like it definitely feels like, yeah, capacity is a good word for it. It feels like there's an additional space for problems to be without the usual without the usual like reflexive reaction to it, you know.
It almost reminds me of, um, something that I talk about with clients and new coaches, especially, is the idea that problems can't be solved without properly defining them. And so sometimes I talk about that from the perspective of, self-awareness. And I always share the example of, students who picked a major but don't necessarily want that major. They don't know it yet, but they changed their major their junior year because they never did the exploration that you were just talking about to get those insights to determine, what they wanted to do. And it reminds me of a quote. We've talked about this quote before too, by Albert Einstein. And it's, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. So I'm curious how you would say that translates to the coaching world.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it was Einstein as well. And this might be a misquote, but the idea is that we can't solve a problem with the same kind of thinking that created it, right? So
Yes, that is him too.
there's this element of, okay, so what level are we dealing with here? And there is, I mean, on a I don't know, coachy level, like a lot of these problems, like when I'm at my very best, like when I've got my own, exercised, hydrated, did morning routine, all those things, uh, there is a perspective that's available of being grateful even for the challenges. And there was something like, let's use writing as an example. Um, I Stephen Pressfield. Uh, some books are good, some of not, but whatever. He's prolific and he produces and he ships and fine. Uh, there was a newsletter or I got of his. There was a quote that talked about, or a story he was saying. He met a writer who was successful, done this work. He was going through a hard time, and he asked for advice. He said, "I'm really struggling right now," and this kind of thing. And the advice was, he's from this other author said he's never known a writer whose writing has suffered based on the writer's struggle. That struggling writers who struggle sometimes with life and these kinds of things actually end up it improves the writing. It brings a humanity, it brings a depth, it brings a pathos. This isn't that, I'm not saying like, yay, go out and struggle and suffer and be, it's not that, but it's an allowing of being with the hurt, of being with the pain, of being with. And this is, go into the difference between counseling and coaching, and you think about, okay, so are we really doing, when does this get into therapy if we're talking about pain and suffering and being with these kinds of things? For me, the biggest difference is I'm not trying to diagnose, I'm not trying to fix, I'm not trying to solve, I'm not trying to, go down this fits patterns of dysfunction that I'm recognizing this is where it goes, which I understand, and I think that it's really valuable for coaches to have professional partnerships with counselors. Like, it's a really valuable, and when I had my private practice, I did, and it was really useful. And I didn't talk to her like that often, but often enough that we kept pulse and I could run things by her, and it was great. From going and looking at the idea of being with, it really helps to have a support network and be able to talk things out. And coaching does that in a way that you just don't have a judgment around it. It's more about curiosity. And when you go there, the problem, if we go with the problem, it tends to shift away from the external circumstances. When you're focusing, coaching the problem, the external circumstances become the most important thing. When you're in a coaching session and you're focusing on the client, the attention shifts where you're using those external circumstances as a stressor to make other things show up that might not have shown up. You make cracks in your, cracks in your being. I don't know. There are cracks in the way that, things show up, like weaknesses show up in starker relief. Even strengths show up in starker relief. Like the pressure helps you see things that you can improve more clearly. And when you start thinking about asking yourself, how is this problem showing me my strengths and weaknesses? Now you're looking at your being again. That's coaching the client. So it's not like the problem, I'm not ignoring the problem, but I'm using the problem to help bring out those characteristics in starker relief so that we can coach around them, gather an insight, and then reapply it to the problem and see what happens. So then it becomes almost like a science experiment. Like, okay, so if I approach this with this, this kind of insight, how does it affect my being? If I take that and then apply it back to the problem, does it get the result I want or not? And the ICF has moved in this direction too. They used to have 3 different sections on action steps, on 3 different things on action steps. They consolidated that to 1, and they emphasized the idea of having an insight as a catalyst for the action. So this is the direction that coaching is going. And it's exciting to me because it underlines a lot of what we know about positive psychology too, where there's an element of it's your own, character strengths and virtues, your own strengths. Are you living a strengths-based life? And this is, it's exciting to me because it feels like these ideas are going to percolate throughout popular culture, and it already is. I mean, we see it. You see evidence of it, and it will eventually get to education, but we'll see.
Yeah. And like the other side of this topic is, we just talked about like having properly defined problems by defining them through our internal, like what's going on internally, as a way to define what's happening externally, or not necessarily to define, but to solve what's happening externally, brings about stronger solutions. So, just like a great example that we talk about in class is, a student comes to you asking for help on their schedule, making a schedule for their week. You help them fix their schedule without asking any questions. They're going to come back to you next week and ask you to help them do it again, because you haven't helped them define the problem. And what that problem might actually be nothing related to their schedule. Maybe they're having sleep issues. Maybe their parents are fighting. Maybe their dad just got a new job and they're moving across the country. Who knows what it is? But if you don't ask to figure out what's going on behind the scenes, that problem isn't fully defined. And so that's great. We can define these problems, we can search internally, and we can develop stronger solutions. But when we think about the opposite, or the other side of the coin, is this idea of getting stuck on a problem. So even we know what it is, we've done the digging to define it. We all know that feeling, right? Of when you've been staring at your screen for over an hour without any meaningful progress, and you're just feeling frustrated. And, it can happen with larger life problems too. Should I start my own business? Should I leave my job? Should I do whatever? And so, I kind of have a twofold question here, but the first of them being, what do you think causes this feeling of being stuck in like the clients and people that you've worked with in the past?
So I did an interview just yesterday. We're getting the interview series rolling again with interviewing experts and also participants in our community. And I interviewed Tomer, who was a participant in the community, and he lives in Manhattan. He has been in musical theater. He's now a director. He has a coaching practice, much like your own, where you work with creatives and we've gone down these paths, and it's amazing. The insights are so rich, and we've talked about this in different ways. Where let's say someone's trying to create something like a novel or a movie or script or a painting, whatever it is. Tomer's thing we talked a lot about yesterday was, in his experience when he's working with clients, most clients want to pour their whole being into their art and make their art about them, make their art some sort of project that speaks to their worth, and they can throw all of their wisdom and all of themselves into this, and this is their baby. I get it. His thing is, no, he has to uncouple that from people and look at, no, this doesn't represent you. This only represents a small little sliver of you. I feel it when people are looking at their coaching practice, like, trying to develop their coaching practice and come up with their specialty or their niche, and they think, okay, this has to define me. This practice now defines me. It's my whole, it's my worth is tied up in the approval of others of this project that I'm doing. And somehow it becomes this thing where people can get super stuck in that, really stuck. And this project defines me. And his thing is, no, it's just a sliver. And the best part is if people uncouple okay, this doesn't need to define all of me. This only needs to define a part of me. And my work is to just roll up my sleeves and get the job done. Get the thing written. Get the website up. Whatever that is, just a sliver. And if you define that, the next step in the process is usually you get a better understanding of the whole of you when you define just this small little sliver. And it's exactly it. Like, you can try to look at, approach time management from the standpoint of, oh, you need to spend at least 2 hours a day working on this project to get this done. And why aren't you doing your 2 hours a day? Like, you start at 8, you end at 10. Like, that would be coaching the problem. It just, you can feel the energy. It just feels like, because essentially what you're asking your clients to do, or ourselves to do in this situation, would be spend 2 hours working on this project, but the whole time you're just upping the stress levels because you feel like it needs to define all of you, right? That's horrible. That's rough. That's not fun. That's not going to work. Our beings won't allow that to work well. And so people feel stuck. And instead, if we have an insight like that, like, what small part of you is this? Not all of you, just breathe that in. What small part? Okay. That's that part of me. Good. Now think about spending 2 hours on that, like just defining that little small part and just getting the job done. The energy feels different. The beingness feels different. And it's that insight. Yes. Does the coach bring that knowledge, bring that insight? Absolutely, yes. So there's a kernel of insight. There's a kernel of knowledge. There's a kernel a kernel of knowledge that then you shift into that curiosity, that empowerment mode. What does that mean to you? And that's the coaching process. And that's why this process helps people get unstuck. I mean, one example, right, of a possible sticking point that I think applies to a lot. I mean, that carries a lot of water. Yeah.
I think so too. And it makes me think about, when working with clients too, there's often times where, this stuck feeling, and I think this sort of goes along with what you were saying, comes from looking at what's happening through one lens. And so, one of my favorite tools that we use is like the perspectives tool. And, we always encourage people to pretend that they're trying on different pairs of glasses. And so I think about, like, when someone's stuck like that, they're seeing their whole worldview through, they're looking at their problem and through their whole worldview. So what essentially you're asking them to do is take off their worldview glasses, so to speak, and put on like this part of you glasses. And how do those glasses change your, perception and how you look at and approach the problem? And so I'm curious, besides just that little sliver piece, are there other times where you notice asking people to put on these different perceptions, glasses, how does that help people become unstuck in those regard as well?
Yeah, I mean, almost any almost any point where people feel stuck is is an opportunity to explore. And it's hard to say, like, you know what's stuck, not, I mean, it's hard to say, like, what are the things that any one person or globally get into. I'm trying to think of other. I mean, it can go. Yeah, there's so many things. Like, so we're putting together a coaching library. I'm coaching a couple people and getting it, getting these things done. And it's amazing to feel. They're three different people. They have very different challenges, and it's also just amazing to feel the the power of letting people process out loud, like letting people process in a space that it it can be unexpected, like what comes out of it. And part of my what I love about the coaching process is that we don't have to know the answer for our client. You don't. In fact, it's better if you don't. It's better if you don't know the answer. And that to me is is so counterintuitive.
Mm.
It's wildly counterintuitive. Uh, it's part of, I think, what needs to change too in our education system, because I think our education system teaches people to always have an answer at all times, and if you don't, then it's wrong. And it doesn't teach us to really define. So even to, like, get really good at defining, okay, so what is it that I can do, like, given what I know, like, how can I create my own assignment and create my own ideas that don't have necessarily like a percentage, or, like, there's like a perfect there's like a perfect ideal out there that I'm trying to achieve. What if that doesn't exist and I can just create something that I have to monitor my parameters of success? And when our education system does a terrible job at that, um, the only times I think it does do well with, does kind of get there, is when you're looking at anything that involves competition. Like,
Mm.
let's say, it could be like a science fair or a book writing thing, or, speech and debate, or sports. Like, anytime that you're, like, competing and using, competition to make yourself better, that gets there. That starts to teach that kind of, using competition as a, way to motivate yourself. Which is why I think traditionally sports are so strong, and why coaching, I mean, a lot of it comes from sports psychology. Like, if you really truly are pushing yourself to a peak performance, these are the exercises that we know work on the athletic field. What if we apply those same exercises to our internal world? From a sports psychology standpoint, we eh, the solution to get out of our own self is not universal. We each have to find that answer for ourselves, and coaching is a pathway to do that. But we each have to do that internal work ourselves.
I love that. I think that's a really beautiful way for people to have a deeper understanding of coaching. I know a lot of my newer coaches, if they were watching, were probably very uncomfortable with the statement of, like, it's better if we don't know the answer. But I think what you just said really sums it up nicely of, everybody's journey is different. And so we all have to do that work for ourselves, or else the solutions and the achievements and the goals, they don't stick as well if someone else does them for us. I think that's really a beautiful way to sort of wrap up this idea of problem solving, and the way that it's important for us to do our own internal work.
these insights can help. There's no, I mean, I was inspired when Tomer, I mean, we've talked, you and I have talked about this, but talking to Tomer, the way he put it together, I thought, oh, I love that. And the insight helps. These insights can prompt healing. They can prompt, action, inspired action. Like, oh yeah, this is great. You know, it's important to be fed this. It's important to be fed insights, and then to do the empowerment work. You know, and that's why I love coaching. Is I love that balance, and I feel like, when you're in there and you're working with a client and you have this feeling of I was born to do this work. That's when you know. Yeah, that's when you know you're on the path. Well, thank you, Britt. This is fun. These feed the soul in a deep way of realizing that these ideas they're moving the ball forward. And I was thinking today, I was working on this thing. I was like, why is it taking me so long to do this one little thing? And it's so, like, we've been working on it for a while, and I'm, passing this by, like, getting multiple eyes on it, trying, that kind of thing to get it, to get it really dialed in well. And I was thinking about, I knew this was coming up in this, this from Tomer's thing in my head too. And I had this thought of, when you're in it, when you're trying to establish your coaching practice, or you're trying to learn a new skill, or you're trying to do all these things, a full half or 50% of the mental emotional energy is in making sure that we are good, like making sure that you feel the place you need to be. And I think that we tend to take that mental emotional work for granted, but a full 50% of our effort is on on ourselves. And making sure you're sleeping, eating well, exercising, like all those things matter, really, really deeply. It took me a couple of years to figure that out when I first started, because I just wanted to take that for granted, my own space. And as long as you're moving the ball forward every day and have a habit to move the ball forward every day, you're on the path.
I have so many other questions, but I will save them for another day.
Next time, right? Next time. Oh, it's good. It's lovely. It's so good to have you here. And we were doing our own, Between Us Humans book reviews and things like that too. There's more to come. But thank you everyone for keep the questions coming. Keep them coming. We're going to try to get to them when we can. And thanks for listening and being a part of the Coach Training EDU community. Thank you, Britt. Thanks, Ashley. And see you next week.